Hey, I think it's time we hit another battlefield.
Okay.
What do you think? Hello there, parapeeps, and welcome to another episode of Our Haunted Travels. I'm your host, Sean Donnelly.
I'm your co-host, Marianne Donnelly.
Today we're here in Yorktown, Virginia.
That's right.
The Yorktown Battlefield, and we're going to tell you about it.
All right.
But before we get into that, if you're into the paranormal history, forensic, and travel type videos,
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ding that little bell so you'll hear from us next time we post a new video.
so let's go and find out what this is all about.
All right. We know a little bit.
Got a little
Let's
camera
find out
back
some
there.
more.
Let's share it with them.
All right.
All right, here we go.
"168 years before the American Revolutionary War, English colonists of the Virginia Company chose land along the James River for their settlement. Established in 1607, they named it Jamestown. It became the first permanent English settlement in North America. Disease and starvation threatened to wipe out this fragile English colony. If not for the help of local indigenous people during these early years, the settlement would most likely have failed. In 1619, after enduring years of hardship, the colonists of Jamestown formed the first representative assembly in North America. That summer, the first enslaved Africans in English-occupied North America arrived at Point Comfort, located at present-day Fort Monroe. The seeds of what was to become the United States had taken root. English and other European settlers poured into Virginia seeking land for the labor-intensive cash crop, tobacco. Indigenous people were forced from their land, and the demand for enslaved African labor grew. The settlement at Yorktown was established in 1691 and soon became a key tobacco port. The population in the colonies increased rapidly, and by the mid-1700s was heavily dependent upon trade with Britain. After years of fighting the French for global supremacy, the British needed to recoup their expenses.
They decided to raise taxes on the American colonists, but the problem was the colonists had no representation in Great Britain in the Parliament.
The colonists felt exploited and wanted to be treated fairly as British citizens. Some held on to the hope of a peaceful resolution, while others urged open rebellion. In 1775, the tension reached a breaking point at Lexington and Concord, when the British Army clashed with a company of Massachusetts militiamen. The War for American Independence had begun. 2 months later at Bunker Hill, inexperienced colonial forces stood up to the vastly superior British Army. The colonists were forced to retreat, but not before inflicting heavy casualties. The British significantly underestimated the colonists at Bunker Hill. They were in need of more troops, so they hired professional armies from Germany to help crush the colonial rebellion.
They're commonly referred to as Hessians, although they were not all from that part of Germany. They were brought in by the thousands and were a real lightning rod for the colonists, fighting against not only their own country, but hirelings that had been brought in from another nation.
News of Bunker Hill galvanized people across all 13 colonies, and soon after, George Washington took command of the newly formed Continental Army. The Continental Army was a diverse group. They were Irish, French, Prussian, Hungarian, Polish, and free African Americans. They were farmers, merchants, bakers, and craftsmen. Even boys as young as 15 years joined. Over the course of the war, nearly 5,000 enslaved Africans also enlisted in the Continental Army. July 4th, 1776. After more than a year of fighting, the Declaration of Independence was approved by Congress. It was a giant step forward, but not for everyone. Abigail Adams, in a letter to her husband John, implored him to remember the ladies, but women were still excluded from the Declaration of Independence. Despite these circumstances, women defended their home. Others provided information and acted as spies. Hundreds, if not thousands, followed the army into the field and were employed as seamstresses, cooks, and nurses. Many of these women witnessed firsthand the horrors of war. And a few, such as Margaret Corbin and Deborah Sampson, even fought in battles. But European Americans were not the only ones deeply affected by the revolution. Indigenous people were torn between the two sides. Some supported the rebellion, some the British. Many tribes were offered their land back if they fought for the crown. Others tried to stay neutral. Enslaved people were also caught in the middle. Early in the war, the British promised freedom to those who left their masters to fight against the revolution, and many seized this opportunity. A large segment of the colonists were neutral about the war, and they all shared a common desire for survival. But amidst the destruction, devastation, and uncertainty of this conflict, the revolution ripped apart the social fabric of colonial America. Lucy Knox was disowned by her family when she married Henry Knox and joined the Patriot cause. She wrote to her sister,
"How horrid is this war? Brother against brother and the parent against the child."
In the summer of 1776, British forces took New York City and nearly captured Washington's army. That winter, Washington's victories at Trenton and Princeton, New Jersey, gave the struggling Continental Army a much-needed boost. For the next year, much of the heavy fighting took place in the northern colonies. Great Britain seemed to have the upper hand, but after news of the American victory in New York at Saratoga reached the court of King Louis XVI, France became the first nation to recognize the United States. On February 6, 1778, in Paris, French delegates and members of the Continental Congress signed the Treaty of Alliance. France had joined the fight. Soon after, Spain declared war against Britain, and the Netherlands began to openly provide financial aid to the United States. What had started as a colonial rebellion had grown into a world war. By 1779, however, the fighting had reached a stalemate in the northern colonies. General Sir Henry Clinton, commander of all British forces in North America, was safely encamped with his army in New York City. Washington, still too weak to attack, was forced to wait for additional troops from France. After the capture of Savannah, Georgia, Clinton decided to shift the British focus to the south. He set his sights on Charleston, South Carolina, one of the largest and richest cities in the colonies. In May 1780, after nearly 6 weeks of siege, the British prevailed. With this victory in hand, Clinton left Lieutenant General Lord Charles Cornwallis in charge of the Southern campaign. The defeat at Charleston was a huge blow. With over 3,000 American soldiers taken as prisoners of war, morale in the Continental Army fell. After 6 years of fighting, many of Washington's soldiers were exhausted, starving, and underpaid.
You begin to see mutinies. In January of 1781, Washington puts them down, but he knows his army is a kind of powder keg that's going to explode. And if something doesn't happen soon that's positive, the entire American war effort could collapse.
Despite these challenges, the Continental Army endured another harsh winter, held together by discipline, a deep belief in the cause, and faith in their leader, George Washington. That spring, Washington met with French Lieutenant General Rochambeau in Wethersfield, Connecticut. As they worked together to plan their next move, trust and a mutual respect grew between the two men. In the South, the British controlled Georgia and most of South Carolina. But after the defeats at the battles of Kings Mountain and Cowpens, followed by his costly victory at Guilford Courthouse, Cornwallis determined that the British strategy wasn't working. That May, he invaded Virginia without permission from General Clinton. The Americans opposing him were led by the Marquis de Lafayette, a 23-year-old French aristocrat. They were hugely outnumbered, but for months managed to evade Cornwallis. Lafayette's advantage? He had a secret operative. An enslaved man named James Armistead was helping him track Cornwallis.
Lafayette would recruit James Armistead to become what we would call today a double agent. He was working around the British, especially where they served their meals, and he was actually listening very carefully to these officers talking about military plans. They had no idea that he was a spy.
That June, Rochambeau and 4 French regiments marched from Rhode Island to join Washington and his army encamped outside New York City. The presence of the French began to worry Clinton, so he wrote to Cornwallis requesting troops be sent north. The letter was significantly delayed, however, and Clinton grew frustrated.
Clinton was pretty angry that Cornwallis had come into Virginia without waiting for his permission. But he told him, since you are in Virginia, you need to find a base to support the British Navy. So Cornwallis did reconnaissance, and he decided to set up that British naval base here at Yorktown.
Yorktown's deep waters could accommodate large warships, and the bluffs would provide strong defensive positions for British guns. On August 1st, nearly 8,000 British and German troops descended upon Yorktown. Many residents fled. Those loyal to the crown stayed. Utilizing the labor of runaway enslaved Africans, the British began to fortify Yorktown with earthen walls and outer defensive forts. Cornwallis, however, was in no hurry. He saw little danger from Lafayette and his troops. Washington was still outside New York when he received news that would change the war. French Admiral de Grasse was coming from the West Indies with his entire fleet, 3,000 French troops, and money from the people of Spanish Cuba. But de Grasse was not going to New York. Instead, he was sailing to the Chesapeake Bay.
Initially, Washington is angry. This isn't his plan. Washington, for many years of the Revolution, has wanted to attack the British in New York. But Washington was someone who could get over it and then realize what's best for my country is to work with this French plan.
Washington and Rochambeau worked together to slip past Clinton in New York. They sent false communications intended to be intercepted by the enemy. Empty tents and fires were set up to mask troop movements.
General Clinton was so fooled that New York was Washington's target, he didn't realize Washington had moved those armies down south until it was too late.
Meanwhile, the most decisive sea battle of the entire war was about to be fought, strictly between the British and the French. On September 5th, after weeks of searching, British Admiral Thomas Graves found de Grasse anchored just within the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. The French fleet was offloading troops for Lafayette and unprepared for battle. But Graves failed to take advantage of the situation. De Grasse quickly regrouped and sailed out to meet the British. The battle was short and vicious. Poor communication between the British commanders allowed the French to inflict the most damage. Several British ships were badly crippled. As a result, Admiral Graves made the decision to sail his fleet to New York for repairs. It was a huge strategic victory for the Allies. With de Grasse firmly in control of the Chesapeake, Cornwallis was cut off from the British Navy. The French could now safely move troops, supplies, and heavy siege artillery into position around Yorktown. Cornwallis's officers urged him to attack Lafayette or else move inland, yet he refused to budge. He had orders to defend the port, and he awaited reinforcements promised by General Clinton. Conditions in Yorktown deteriorated. Townspeople and soldiers alike faced starvation and sickness. A German officer named Johann Ewald wrote in a diary,
Illness results from the great heat and the continued and frequent drinking of bad water. All medicines are lacking.
Running out of food and supplies, Cornwallis chose to force the enslaved people of Yorktown out past the defensive lines that they had helped build.
Cornwallis betrayed them. There's a lot of death and sickness as many of these runaway slaves are caught between the two lines in the no man's land. If they go over to the American side, well, of course, they're going to be re-enslaved. So it's a very harrowing time for them.
By the end of September, the French and American forces of Washington, Rochambeau, Lafayette, and de Grasse had joined together outside of Yorktown with over 15,000 troops, significantly more than the 8,000 British and German soldiers that were at Cornwallis's disposal. The Allies set to work building a system of trenches around Yorktown. Several days of rain had softened the ground, making digging quick, easy, and quiet.
The British never knew they were out there digging. So when the British looked out at first sight and suddenly saw that very first siege line around them, they knew they were in trouble.
On October 9th, with Allied guns in place, Washington touched off the first American cannon. For days, the American and French artillery tore through Yorktown's defenses, but the British and Germans struggled to muster a response. Soon, the only British obstacles standing in the way of the completion of the second siege line were two small earthen forts, redoubts 9 and 10. On the night of October 14th, Americans under Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Hamilton stormed forward using only their bayonets to prevent any premature warning shots and took Redoubt 10. Later, a column of French captured Redoubt 9. The second siege line could finally be completed. After months of careful planning with Rochambeau, a much-needed victory was within Washington's grasp. The next day, Cornwallis sent a bitter message to Clinton.
Sir, my situation now becomes very critical. I cannot recommend that the fleet and army should run great risk in endeavoring to save us.
On the cold morning of October 17th, French and American cannons resumed fire. In what remained of Yorktown, the situation was grim.
The buildings became pocked with cannonball holes. People were getting ripped apart. It was such a horrifying situation that someone as tough as Lord Cornwallis realized he had no other option but to surrender.
Suddenly, a drummer appeared amid the booming cannon fire. Then an officer appeared, waving a white handkerchief. Slowly, the Americans and French stopped firing. The Battle of Yorktown was over. The surrender took place on October 19, 1781. Sarah Osborne, the wife of an American corporal, witnessed the parade of defeated soldiers.
The army marched out, beating and playing a melancholy tune. The British general was at the head of the army, and the tears rolled down his cheeks as he passed along.
The war had turned around. Nearly a third of Britain's force in North America, taken in a single blow. German officer Johann Abond had been in many battles, but the disheveled appearance of the American army shocked even the veteran captain.
Who would have thought that out of this rebel would arise a people who could defy kings?
The perseverance of the colonists and a strong alliance with France had secured this victory at Yorktown that for many was unthinkable just a few years earlier. Yorktown was the last great battle of the Revolution. But there would be 2 more years of fighting before the signing of the Treaty of Paris would officially end the war and recognize the United States as a free and independent nation. There was much rejoicing and celebration, but this was only the beginning. Americans faced new challenges in the young country. Many people were worse off. Veterans were in debt, denied pay and pensions. Some even lost their farms. while some enslaved people, such as James Armistead, eventually gained their freedom. Most did not until 1865. And Native Americans continued to be forced from their lands and were not declared citizens until 1924.
While America became an independent nation with great ideals, it was still going to have to mature in those ideals. And as a nation, we're still working on those things.
America, this great experiment in democracy, is still a work in progress, and the struggle to form a more perfect union remains. But the dream of freedom and opportunity continues to inspire people, and Yorktown is a lasting memorial to that dream. The first effort to commemorate victory at Yorktown came only 10 days after Cornwallis's army surrendered. Congress authorized the construction of a monument to celebrate triumph over the British, but the fledgling nation lacked funds, so these plans languished for nearly a century. In 1880, funding for the Victory Monument was authorized, and construction was completed in 1884. It memorializes not only the French and American alliance that won the Battle of Yorktown, but also the reconciliation of the United States, so recently torn apart by civil war. Colonial National Historical Park preserves the resources of historic Jamestown and Yorktown Battlefield. Connected by the scenic Colonial Parkway, these two sites represent the beginning and the end of English colonial America, an era that gave birth to what is now the United States. For more than 2 centuries, American democracy has endured as a beacon of light, a beacon of hope to all people who want to be free.
Okay, so we got back into the air conditioning here because, oh man, what's it say? Well, 94.
It said 98
It's a little cooler
earlier,
today.
but now it's dropped to 94. Woo!
Oh,
cold spell.
we just did the Victory Monument.
We did?
And we have, yeah, what did you think about the Battlefield Museum?
It was okay.
It's okay.
You enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah.
He smacked his head something terrible.
When you hear people seeing stars, I was seeing stars, man. I cracked my head. I had my glasses up here, and I hit the bam. Yeah, that hurt.
Yeah.
But all's well. Anything else you'd like to add to this video? Because we're going to go do some other videos about Yorktown, but that was just like the battlefield. And
yeah, I mean, it was a nice little museum. Had a little boat constructed inside, the partial boat you can go in where, you know, you have to
I like
watch your
seeing
head.
the tent that was George
pretty
Washington's. Cool. That was worth
really
stopping
cool.
there. So
Yeah.
that was kind of neat.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap this one up.
All right.
Okay. All right, folks. Till next time.
Thanks for watching.
And happy hunting.
Let us know if you like this video by hitting that thumbs up. Also, if you'd like to see more videos from us in the future, support our channel by hitting that subscribe button and dinging that bell so you get notified the next time there's a video from Panic D Videos.
Thanks for watching.
Happy hunting.